On January 28th, U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent launched a personal attack against Mark Carney over his Davos speech, accusing the Canadian Prime Minister of virtue signaling and scoring cheap political points at the expense of Canada's national interest. Speaking at Trump's Account Summit in Washington, Bessent issued a blunt warning. "I would just encourage Prime Minister Carney to do what he thinks is best for the Canadian people, not his own virtue signaling, because we do have a USMCA negotiation coming up." He added, "I would not pick a fight going into USMCA to score some cheap political points. Either you're working for your own political career or you're working for the Canadian people." Bessent went further, attacking Carney's entire political rise. He rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump message, and that's not a great place to be when you're negotiating with an economy that is multiples larger than you are and your biggest trading partner. Bessent even mocked Carney's transition from central banker to politician. "In my investment career, I've seen what happens when a technocrat tries to pivot and become a politician. It never really works out well." The condescension was unmistakable. Bessent was telling Carney to stay quiet, bow down, and accept American dominance. Speak up for Canadian sovereignty, and you'll be punished in CUSMA renegotiations. But Bessent's attack contained a fundamental lie. He claimed Carney picked a fight. In reality, Donald Trump launched the first shots. In 2025, the Trump administration slapped tariffs on a range of Canadian exports to the United States without provocation. Trump has threatened 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods, 50% tariffs on Canadian aircraft, and repeatedly suggested Canada should become the 51st state. Just hours before Carney's Davos speech, Trump posted an image on social media depicting Greenland and Canada as part of the United States. So who really picked this fight? The aggressor is clear, and his name is Donald Trump. Bessent was not alone in criticizing Carney's Davos speech. Some prominent Canadian voices echoed his concerns, arguing that antagonizing Trump before CUSMA renegotiations was strategically foolish. Lucy Hargreaves, co-founder of Build Canada, a tech industry think tank, wrote an op-ed for the Toronto Star calling Carney's speech poorly judged. She wrote, "This is why Carney's behavior is so concerning. It suggests that we are back where Trudeau left us, political leaders scoring anti-American points for partisan gain at the country's enormous detriment." Hargreaves framed Carney's speech as self-serving politics that would harm Canada economically. Goldy, Hyder, president of the Business Council of Canada, which represents the chief executives of some of the biggest companies operating in Canada, also expressed concern. Carney is a really smart guy, and he said in the United Kingdom during Brexit, it's really dangerous for the United Kingdom to separate itself from its number one trading partner, Hyder told Bloomberg News. And yet, that's exactly kind of the narrative that came out in Davos. The implication was that Carney was hypocritically advocating for Canada to do what he warned Britain not to do during Brexit: distance itself from its largest economic partner and risk catastrophic consequences. These critiques share a common theme. They prioritize economic caution over political principle. They assume that Canada's best strategy is to appease Trump, stay quiet, avoid confrontation, and hope for mercy in trade negotiations. But this logic has a fatal flaw. It assumes Trump will reward Canadian submissiveness with fair treatment. History proves otherwise. During Trump's first term, Canada bent over backwards to accommodate American demands in USMCA negotiations. Trump still imposed steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada, calling it a national security threat. He still insulted Justin Trudeau. He still threatened Canadian industries. Appeasement does not work with Trump. It never has, and it never will. Weakness invites further exploitation. Strength, even when risky, commands respect. Not all Canadian leaders agreed with the critics. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew praised Carney's speech, specifically highlighting its moral clarity. In an interview with CBC's Power and Politics, Kinew said it would be a mistake to try to simply keep our collective heads down. We have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror as Canadians, as Canada, at the end of this. And I think it's completely appropriate for our Prime Minister to give the speech that he gave at Davos. Kinew emphasized that Canada must maintain its integrity and self-respect, even under pressure from a more powerful neighbor. He added, everyone, including Donald Trump, should expect that we're still going to show up at the negotiating table and drive a hard bargain when it comes to the CUSMA review. Kinew used a perfect Canadian metaphor. This is who we are as Canadians. We're the adults in the room. We are people who can go into the corners at a hockey rink and then go out for beers at the end of the hockey game. The message was clear. Canada can compete fiercely without sacrificing its values. It can stand up for itself without abandoning the possibility of cooperation. Being tough and being principled are not contradictory. They are complementary. Moral clarity is not a weakness, it is a strength. Brian Clough, a former advisor to Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau, defended Carney's approach by pointing out that Canadians expect their Prime Minister to tell them the truth about threats from the United States. As we saw in the first term, sometimes it didn't take much to generate a huge reaction from the Americans, Clough said. He argued that CUSMA talks were always going to be difficult regardless of Carney's speech, and that previous episodes of conflict with the Trump administration eventually faded. The implication was that standing firm on principles does not preclude eventual negotiation and compromise. But staying silent in the face of bullying guarantees, Canada will enter negotiations from a position of weakness, not strength. When presented with Bessent's remarks, Carney did not apologize. He did not back down. He did not soften his message. Instead, he rolled his eyes and bluntly declared, "To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos." He told reporters en route to a cabinet meeting that he explained to Trump that Canada was the first country to understand the change in U.S. trade policy that Trump initiated, and we're responding to that. Carney emphasized that Canada is striking 12 new deals over 4 continents in 6 months. He said Trump was impressed. This was Carney calling Bessent's bluff. Far from being chastened or apologetic, Carney doubled down on his strategy and claimed Trump himself understood and respected it. This directly contradicted the American narrative. Bessent had claimed he was on the call between Trump and Carney after Davos, and that Carney had walked back his remarks. Bessent said the Canadian leader had been conciliatory and apologetic, but Carney flatly denied this. The two accounts cannot both be true. Either Bessent is lying to make Carney look weak, or Carney is lying to make himself look strong. Given Trump's track record of dishonesty and the Trump administration's pattern of distorting facts, Carney's version is far more credible. Bessent has every incentive to portray Carney as backing down. It makes Trump look powerful and Canada look subordinate. It discourages other countries from standing up to American pressure. But Carney's consistency and public defiance suggest he is telling the truth. He stood his ground. The fact that Bessent felt the need to attack Carney so publicly also reveals something important. The Davos speech rattled the Trump administration. If Carney's words were meaningless virtue signaling, Bessent would have ignored them, but he didn't. He spent significant time and political capital trying to delegitimize Carney's message. That means the message was effective. It resonated, and it threatened Trump's narrative that America can bully its allies without consequence. Wherry, CBC's chief political correspondent, captured the fundamental question at the heart of this controversy. Sovereignty might not mean much if Canadian leaders have to forever hold their tongues. This is the core dilemma. If Canada must stay silent whenever the United States threatens it, if Canadian prime ministers cannot criticize American aggression without being accused of picking fights, if defending Canadian interests is automatically labeled virtue signaling, then what does sovereignty actually mean? It becomes an empty word, a formality with no substance. Canada would have the trappings of independence, a flag, a government, a seat at the United Nations, but no real autonomy. Every major decision would require American approval. Every public statement would need to pass American censors. Wherry also asked whether Carney's speech was really motivated by a desire to score political points, or whether those political points were particularly cheap. The answer is obvious. Carney ran for office on a platform of standing up to Trump-style politics. He won a Democratic mandate from Canadian voters to do exactly what he did in Davos. Reiterating his campaign promises is not opportunism. It's democracy. It's following through on commitments made to the electorate. If Canadians wanted a prime minister who would bow to Trump, they had that option. They chose Mark Carney instead. So when Carney defends Canadian sovereignty, he is not pursuing his own political career. He is representing the will of the people who elected him. Moreover, if a fight is being had, one might ask whether Carney or Canada can really be said to have picked it. Canada was largely minding its own business a year ago when the United States launched tariffs against Canadian products. Trump threatened annexation, called Canada the 51st state, insulted Canadian leaders, and imposed economic punishment for no legitimate reason. Carney's Davos speech was a response to ongoing American aggression, not an unprovoked attack. The real question is not whether Carney should have stayed quiet, The real question is whether any self-respecting leader of a sovereign nation could have stayed quiet and maintained credibility. The answer is no. Silence would have been surrender. They and Mark Carney refused to surrender Canadian sovereignty to Donald Trump's threats. That's not virtue signaling, that's leadership.